Weird Tales Double Feature, The Death Pit and In Cashla's Garden by Lillian Schisgall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. The Death Pit, Chapter 4, The Inquiry. Though they carried the boy to the upper floor where they tucked him comfortably on a cot, there was no sleep for Agatha and Timothy Cruz that night. Sleep after the terrors of the past few hours was impossible. Everything was impossible, save their sitting in the dark room, silent and morbid. Agatha sat near the window, her stolid face bent, her hands clasped in her lap. Opposite her, Timothy glared at the lamp, his huge countenance deeply lined. Nervously, his hands rubbed over his knees. He was not conscious of his wet clothes. He was conscious of only one thing. He had murdered a man. And in the morning he would be compelled to meet inquiring villagers. Well, his story was ready. Their unspoken meditations were interrupted a dozen times by the chattering of Gilbert. From the upper floor floated the weird chant of, "The doctor's in the well." It fell upon Timothy Cruz with the weight of a blow, and shattered his courage. Each wildly uttered word pounded upon his conscience, pounded steadily, gloomily, unavoidably. He writhed under the weight of the song. Once he sprang to his feet, stamped across the room, and rasped madly, "Can't you make him stop? Can't you make him stop that damn thing? He's driving me crazy." Moodily, the gaunt Agatha answered without glancing up. "Sit down, Tim. It's the boy's fever. Don't let it bother you." He tried bravely to follow her instructions. When he sat again, his hands gripped the edge of the chair in an effort to find strength. But he could not escape the fantastic, repeated, "The doctor's in the well." At dawn, when Agatha blew the flame from the wick of the oil lamp, he was limp and haggard. With bent shoulders, he sagged in his chair, and his lips quivered. Soon the villagers would come, and upstairs Gilbert was still muttering occasionally, "The doctor's in the well." A bright sun vanquished the rain clouds. Fresh from its shower, the countryside sparkled in the golden light of morning. Vapory masses of billowing white rose lazily from the mountain forests and were wafted away in ephemeral cloudlets. The vague odor of pine drifted down upon the rickety home of the Cruzes. Timothy stepped out of the house, filled his lungs with the invigorating air. He looked for an instant at the brilliance of the rising sun, blazing above a distant ridge. He stared about, as he did every morning, at the maze of fiery colors and the dying leaves of autumn. And then he glanced at the boards which covered the well. He shuddered. 50 feet under those boards lay the lifeless thing he had thrown there. With gratification, he noticed that no marks of his footsteps remained in the mud. The rain had effectively washed them into oblivion. Queer, he thought, how daylight brought reassurance and courage. He could breathe easily now, though his head throbbed with lack of sleep, and his eyes were black and cadaverous. He turned to find Agatha, angular and forbidding and ungainly beside him. She thrust a slip of paper into his hand. "Nail it up to the door," she said sullenly. "Don't stand around dreaming. When the folks come, tell 'em you put this up until the doctor sent you one of those regular signs. Get busy, Tim." He fixed the paper to the door. It bore the alarming words, "Scarlet fever." "That'll keep 'em out," mumbled Agatha. She was right. It was almost noon after an interminably long morning, when 4 men from the village walked up the road to their home. When the delegation, rather breathless from the rapid search for the doctor, came into the yard, they paused. The glaring sign stopped them as abruptly as the muzzle of a gun might have done. They eyed each other hesitantly, but Agatha and Timothy stepped out of the door, a tall, menacing couple, uncouth and lumbering. It was the woman who called, "Good morning." A short, bald man twisted his hat in his hands, moved forward to act as spokesman. Before venturing a word, he tugged at both ends of a shaggy mustache. "Morning, Mrs. Cruz. Is your Gilbert who's down with the fever?" "Yes, the boy." "The boy's in a terrible condition," interposed Timothy. That, he recalled, was the proper phrase for such an occasion. Somewhat abashed, the spokesman stammered, I'm sorry we got to bother you, then, but, well, something mighty peculiar's happened. Something very strange."
"What's that?" demanded Timothy. He frowned questioningly. Dr. Philemon. He's disappeared."
"Dr. Philemon?" Even Agatha admired the surprise in her husband's tone. She raised her brows to indicate her own amazement.
Yeah," grumbled the spokesman. "Just disappeared."
Timothy eyed his wife, then turned back to the villagers. "What do you mean he's disappeared? When? How?"
"Dunno, Cruz. Dunno anything about it except what we found this morning."
"What?"
"His wife, she sent out a sort of general alarm. Said her husband hadn't come home after going to your house." "He did come to our house," said Agatha. "I know, so we started up here to ask if he'd left, and we found his buggy down the road."
"His buggy?" exclaimed Timothy, moving forward out of the door. "You found his buggy?"
"Yeah, empty."
"Well..." Timothy addressed the exclamation to his wife, and Agatha succeeded in looking mystified, though she was racked by turbulent nervousness. From her position, she could see the boards which covered the well. The sight nauseated the woman, but she was too hardened a stoic to surrender to her emotions.
"What do you mean, you found his buggy empty?" she demanded.
The bald spokesman shrugged.
"Just that, Mrs. Cruz. We came upon it about a mile or so down past Drake's. The horse tied to a tree, and no sign of the doctor."
Agatha expressed fright in her widened eyes.
Do you think he could have been held up?"
"Held up?
On a night like that, and that storm and everything? Dunno, ma'am, but it don't seem likely. Besides, well, lots of queer things happened last night. The doctor's house was robbed."
"What?"
It was Timothy who again vented feigned surprise. "Yeah, his wife's jewels taken, money taken, safe busted. And then the doctor comes up here and disappears. Funny."
"Mighty funny," agreed Cruz. He scowled and scratched his head. "Let's see," he mused. "He left here about... What time would you say, Agatha?"
"About 2:30, I guess."
"Yes, about then. Got into the buggy and drove off." The bald man pulled at his mustache, perplexed.
"Didn't he act sort of strange?"
"Not as I noticed," decided Timothy.
"He didn't say a word about the robbery?" "You know, he discovered it before he left home to come here."
Cruz felt an impulse to utter an oath. He cast an uneasy glance at his motionless wife, for he realized they had erred. Surely Dr. Philemon would have mentioned the robbery. It must have been paramount in the physician's mind. To suppose that he would have called without speaking of it was ridiculous, and yet the Cruzes had simulated amazement at the announcement of the theft. Their caution had been too great to be convincing. He could detect a hint of suspicion in the villager's query. The man had turned to look at his three associates. A meaning look, it seemed. But Agatha Cruz assumed control of the situation as she did in all crises. She was cool. Her gaze had roved over the distant hills to the blue skies, to the drifting clouds skimming lightly before a flippant breeze. As she watched them, a pained expression crossed her features. She said quite pathetically,
"Maybe the doctor did act sort of funny. Maybe he did, Tim. We didn't notice. Our Gil was so sick. So sick. Even the doctor must have forgotten that robbery when he saw the boy. He didn't mention it anyway. He was too busy with Gil, poor boy."
The spokesman coughed sympathetically.
"Of course," he said. "Of course Dr. Philemon wouldn't have bothered you with his own troubles at a time like that. He was too much of a gentleman, was the doctor. Is the doctor." He hastily corrected himself, as if regretting the implication in his use of tenses. "What seems to be the matter with your boy, Mrs. Cruz?" She choked a sob, a sincere sob this time, the sob of a mother. "Fever. He's got the fever."
Pityingly, the spokesman shook his head.
"That's awful,"
he muttered, and one of his associates mumbled, "Come on, guess we better be getting back, men. We ought to tell Mrs. Philemon about the buggy and get some police on the job. Come on, let's go. Mrs. Cruz has a boy inside." Readily the spokesman acquiesced. He rubbed a hand over his great mustache and said, "Well, guess we ought to at that. So you ain't got any information to give us, Cruz?" "None except what I told you. Doctor left here about 2:30 after seeing our Gil. Said he'd send a board of health sign up to put on her door. We put this one up meanwhile to keep folks out. No use letting the thing spread.
No, of course not. Well, thanks, Cruz. Don't know what we're going to do about all this. We have to leave it to the police, I suppose. Well, goodbye. Hope your boy gets better real soon.
Thanks, replied Timothy, watching the villagers turn away. Great elation was bubbling within him. He had evaded suspicion. He had fooled them with his wife's brains. And when the visitors had vanished down the road, he turned to Agatha. His eyes shone. He gripped her arms.
"We did it,"
he whispered gleefully. "We sent them off."
"Yes."
Moodily she nodded, as impassionate as ever.
"Come in. We left Gil alone."
They entered, and the boy's voice came to them in its monotonous chant, thudding upon their nerves with its pitiless persistence.
"The doctor's in the well, the doctor's in the well."
Timothy suddenly shuddered. He eyed his wife uneasily. "Can't we make him stop that noise?" he exclaimed harshly. His answer came from the upper floor. Gilbert cried,
"I want to see the well. Take me to the well. Let me see the well. The doctor's in the well."
End of The Death Pit, Chapter 4.